Hello, this is Kip Krill with Standpoint. Thank you for your interest in our webinar on revamping the traditional focus group. Over the last couple of years, we've been paying close attention to the various qualitative research methodologies that we use and marrying that with some new learning in behavioral sciences. And one of the constructs that we discovered a few years back is that trust is a necessary ingredient in most relationships, but particularly in those relationships where you want a sharing of emotional drivers. And we begin thinking about how in the insights industry that really understanding those emotional drivers is critical. So we took it upon ourselves to develop a methodology that allowed us to do a better job at understanding these important things that drive consumer behavior. So before we dive into this, a little bit about us. Standpoint is a research consultancy, and we specialize in bringing the consumer's voice and ideas to your innovation process. And as I alluded to before at the onset, is that our methods are aligned to behavioral sciences with the goal of leveraging the natural abilities of study participants. And we'll talk a lot about using the right people for the right job. So our value proposition to our clients is around maximizing consumer engagement. And when doing so, we achieve better research results. And that ultimately delivers deeper insights for our clients, which we know the insights is a critical fuel for innovation. The methodology that I specifically want to talk about that was used in a front-end of innovation assignment is called WE. And it simply is a group discussion designed to understand the emotional drivers. And one of its benefits is that it can be done with the speed and convenience of traditional focus groups. Trust is the foundation for sharing emotions, and WE is an optimized process for building trust before any live sessions with the consumers. So not only is the process important, but the people that are involved in the qualitative research are equally important. And we engage an essential archetype in the WE methodology called the storyteller. And I'm going to spend a good amount of time describing who this person is and why they're important to the process. So after this webinar, you'll learn a little bit more, and I'll speak a little bit more about the importance of seeking insights and what it is, and the reason that the emotional component is so important. And then I'll speak to the people part of making the WE methodology work and the process for making the WE methodology work, and some considerations of how the WE methodology can be incorporated into your front end of innovation. And then I'll also walk you through a case study where we had a common objective, that we deployed the WE methodology and compared the results to a standard focus group. And we were very pleased with the outcome, and we'll spend time looking at how the process improved not only the consumer's engagement, but the overall content and output of the research study. So let's start talking about insights. This is one of those words that means a lot of things to different people, but we spend a good amount of time internally and with our clients defining exactly what is an insight. And for us, the insight is a deep and intuitive understanding of the consumer, and it defines an area of opportunity. It's typically a motivation or a belief that the consumer has, but it's wrapped in an emotion. And because it's wrapped in an emotion, it really is the so what that's driving behavior. And in understanding that, it can become integral to developing these high potential ideas and concepts. There's also the notion of what makes a great insight. And we use criteria to evaluate the quality of the insight. And first and foremost, it needs to be resonant. And what we mean by that is that it is indeed something that is believed or experienced by the consumer that will or does currently prompt their behavior. It also is something that needs to be unique and differentiated. It's something that your organization can own and that's not being used by competitors. It has depth, which means it's not common knowledge, and it should make you think differently about your business. And lastly, it hits on an emotional trigger. And the more that we learn about the human brain and how decisions are made, we realize that most decisions and behaviors are driven by emotions and not always by logic. So really understanding these emotional drivers helps us to better understand what is causing the consumer to act or not act. And in understanding that, we can then begin to design innovations around that deep understanding. So for the we methodology, let me speak to you a little bit about the people part. When we engage with consumers in consumer research, we typically classify all of our study participants in one of four archetypes. The archetypes are very similar to some of the core functions that you might find in a psychometric test like Myers-Briggs. And in fact, the instrument that we use for the classification of the archetypes has been validated against Myers-Briggs. The archetype that's very important to the we methodology is the storyteller. This person indexes very high on sensing and on feeling. The sensing is the method in which they acquire information. So the storyteller, because they're high on sensing, relies more on their senses of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, than they do on intuition when they're acquiring information. And because they index high on feeling, when making decisions, they put more weight of that decision's impact on people than they do in using like objective facts, data, and logic. Those that index on the thinking continuum tend to put more weight on those things. So as a result, the storyteller has some very common characteristics. They tend to be very sociable. They're very experiential. They are more emotional than the other archetypes. And they're very motivated to help others solve their problems. And they're very skilled at facilitation, mediation, and articulation. And in studying this archetype, we also know that they're quite prevalent in the US population. In fact, 44% of US adults are storytellers. And if you dig down a little bit deeper, you'll see that 56% of females are storytellers, whereas 30% of males. So they are quite prevalent in the US population. We also know the storyteller is hardwired to do certain activities very, very well. And those are listed here in this graphic. They're very good at connecting, very good at empathizing, very good at establishing rapport, expressing their feelings, offering support, reading people, sharing, and working in groups. And these are all characteristics that we need in people when we're engaging them in qualitative research, and particularly in the early stages of your front end of innovation, where getting at needs and pain points and beliefs and motivations is critical. This archetype is outstanding at helping us to understand those things. We also know what the needs of a storyteller are in teams. So in other words, if engaging a storyteller, they need lots of warmth and rapport. They need lots of interaction and group work, fast pace, think time, clear directions. They prefer to have more sensory involvement and sort of tangible involvement. And it's very important for them to make a personal connection. So in engaging them in a qualitative research, you want to make sure that you're hitting on these specific needs with the storyteller. And the we methodology is designed specifically to enable and engage the storyteller with these specific needs that they have. So let's talk a little bit about the process for the we methodology. So the WE methodology works just like any other focus group type of methodology. You would start off with understanding what your enrollment characteristics are for the study. So you might want to include consumers that are not purchasers of your brand, or maybe they're current purchasers of your brand. It works very well in high incidence categories: food, medicine, beverages, household cleaning products, pet products, gardening, home improvement. These are all consumer-oriented industries, and we can select people based on category metrics, just like we normally would in any recruiting project. We then pass these consumers on to an innovation archetyping, and it's a battery of 14 questions that can be deployed online. It can be deployed over the phone. The inclusion of these archetype questions is seamless for the study participant and their experience in getting qualified and enrolled into a study. And if in this particular methodology we showed a preference for storytellers, we know that about 4 in 10 in the general population are going to be the right archetype. So once we've qualified individuals based on category or product usage characteristics, and we know that they're a storyteller, they're enrolled in the study, and they immediately receive a phone call from the conversation leader. And again, this is purposeful in that we want to begin establishing a rapport and the connection. We then migrate all of the individual study participants into a social platform where they would interact with each other for about 1 week. The conversation leader or leaders will also be involved in this platform. And again, it begins to set the stage for the discussion topics. It also allows the study participants to begin to learn about each other and to develop a rapport with the conversation leader. After that week has passed and before the in-person workshop, each individual will receive a call from the conversation leader with the intent purpose of setting up the expectations for the in-person workshop. So the conversation leader will say, we're going to talk about these topics. These are areas that maybe were discussed in the social platform that we want to dig a little bit deeper in. And it just, again, is another opportunity for the conversation leader to make a personal connection with each workshop participant. The workshops are about 2 hours long. They are typically longer than the standard focus group because the format is quite different. There's lots of group activities. There's some individual activities. We also allow at the beginning of the workshop about 10 minutes where participants can unwind, have some refreshments, begin to chit-chat with one another, and begin to break down those barriers among the participants as well as the conversation leaders. Also unique to this methodology is at the end of the workshop, we escort each person into a private room, and they're instructed to film a video selfie, and with the instruction of summarizing their personal responses to a couple of key questions. And when we've gone back and done the content analysis on these selfies, they have been very instrumental in for us understanding better the emotional drivers. And it's pretty remarkable how you can also observe body language in these video selfies as well. And depending on the assignment, some clients have opted to engage the participants in the study for a longer term period of time. So we would reconnect them back into the social platform, and we can go back in with some more moderated discussion, some discussion between each of the participants. We've even pulled a handful of participants out for some one-on-one conversations or other touch points. So there's a great deal of flexibility in what you can do if you choose to engage these consumers for a longer period of time. And it's fantastic because the rapport is already there. They continue to be very open and sharing since the bonds and relationships are firmly established. In the WE methodology, there's also 4 other important building blocks that I have alluded to up to this point, but a couple things that I wanted to point out that are important is that in the WE methodology, there are different dynamics. So we do not have a moderator. We do everything that we can to position the conversation leader as a host or hostess. We think that the lack of an authority figure or a direct authority figure, as you would find in a standard focus group, goes a long way in breaking down those barriers and people perceiving each other as being more as equals. And as we alluded to before, the trust building begins early in the process and well before the study participants show up for an for group session. There is some special training required by the conversation leader. And in addition to the personal phone calls, the conversation leader is also making personal touches with the participants. So for example, once they're enrolled in the study, they might receive a welcome letter, a handwritten welcome letter from the conversation leader. I also know that the moderator on a past study had asked each of the participants to submit pictures of their pets. And then when the individual showed up to the in-person session, she had made name tags with pictures of everyone's pet on it. So just these little details and these personal touches go a long way in establishing the rapport and, again, breaking down the barriers. We're also very mindful of the language that we use. As I said before, some of the language that we're guilty of using in standard focus groups, like respondents or moderators or you're recruited or you get an incentive, we're very careful to dial down those researchy terms and use more human-friendly terms like you're a guest or it's a conversation leader or a host or hostess. You're invited to participate in the session. You're going to receive a gift as opposed to an incentive, which, again, those kind of terms can come across a little bit clinical and old-fashioned. Format is important. So we will employ some relaxation and trust-building activities at the beginning of the in-person session. Typically lots of movement. Something that's also quite unique is that, as you know, in a standard focus group, the questions are one-directional in that the moderator asks a question and then a person or several people respond. In this session, we still do some of that, but for the key questions, we often print them on a tiny slip of paper, put them in a hat, and the hat is passed around and the consumers randomly draw one of the questions or asked to respond to it, and then they are, then the other participants in the session will also respond. But we give the participants also the flexibility to ask each other questions. And we just find that this really, really adds to a lot of more of the context and understanding that we're seeking. And when it's one-directional as well, we think it puts that conversation leader back into a position or an authority position. And we just know in trying to manage the dynamics that we want to mitigate that as much as possible. And we've talked about this too, but maximizing contributions is another important building block. And we've talked about the importance of preparing people in advance, and that's particularly true of the storyteller archetype. We've also deployed tools to help better convey feelings. So, for example, we use some projective techniques through imagery. We've used some emoticon cards. Those are standard tools that a lot of moderators will use, but again, with this particular archetype, we find them to be highly effective. So what are the implications for your front end of innovation? So on this diagram, we've painted a very simplistic view of the various activities that go into your front end of innovation. And these activities span from being very concrete activities to very abstract activities. And as you know, the front end of innovation really starts with inspiration and then moves into ideas and then moves into implementation, at its broadest level. And at different points in this continuum, you can engage with the consumer, and that's denoted by the orange circles. So after scoping the assignment to understand, what's in and out of bounds for this innovation assignment, you could elect to go out and engage with the consumer, and we call that consult. And this is where you could drop in the we methodology, right? It's a qualitative research methodology. Again, you can show preference for the storyteller. Again, they're very good at articulating those needs, those pain points, those motivations, beliefs, all of the things that we know are integral to forming the insight and framing the opportunities. They're having a firm understanding of all of that, and those emotional drivers are very, very important to the process, leading you into ideation. We also recommend engaging consumers in some of the latter stages, where it's idea generation or developing concepts or even evaluating their concepts, because some of the other archetypes that I've spoken about actually are very, very good at some of those activities as well. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're focusing largely on how you can optimize that consult phase by using an improved qualitative research methodology where you've enhanced both the process and the people that are involved. So here's the case study. What we did in the case study is we actually were working with one of our clients, and we ran 2 concurrent qualitative research sessions. One session was using the we methodology, and the other was just a standard focus group. The topic was trying to uncover the emotions around the achievement or not of healthy habits. The behavioral science construct that we know that we were sort of after to sort of enable this was, we know that the conveyance of emotions requires a high level of trust. The venue was quite different between the we group and the standard focus group. We elected to have the we group at a conference room at a botanical garden. There was no observation room. Our client actually participated in the group discussion and was also positioned as one of the conversation leaders. The standard focus group, well, it was pretty standard, right? It was a conference room table with the one-way mirror that we're all accustomed to. In terms of the number of participants, it was roughly equal between the we group and the standard focus group. We had 7 people at the we group. We had 6 people at the standard focus group. Just keep in mind that the 7 people that attended the live event in the we group had been previously connected for about 1 week on the social platform. That was a key difference in the methodologies. The archetypes in the we group, they were all storytellers, and we had quite a mix. For the standard focus group, we had 2 problem solvers, 2 storytellers, and 2 implementers. And if you notice right away, the 4 of the 6 attendees in the standard focus group were not necessarily ideal. The problem solvers and implementers indexed very high on thinking versus feeling, and as a result are not the best equipped to articulate these emotional drivers in a very short period of time. Session length was identical. One of the other benefits of the we methodology is that there's much more opportunity for generating content, which the content then can be later analyzed for getting at the needs and insights. But with the we methodology, we had content coming from the social platform discussion. There were lots of photographs at the live events. There were group activities. There were show and tell, and then also the private selfie video that I spoke about earlier. And then with the standard focus group, we could be a little bit more limited, but here we have the audio and video and the standard written transcripts on which we conducted the analysis. So in this case study, we felt it was important that we measure 2 things. And one of those was engagement and then also the results, right? Because as we talked about before, our value proposition is if we better engage the consumer by designing a better process and also making sure that we have the right people for the job, that the engagement levels are going to be higher, thus leading to better results. So in this case study, we actually measured engagement, and we did it both quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, we asked each individual to fill out a very quick index card that just asked them how engaged that they were. And we took measurements after 30 minutes, at the 60-minute mark, 90-minute mark, and at the end of the session, which was 2 hours. And these just represent the average scores for both the we and the standard focus group. And you can see it consistently across the board with the participants in the we group. The engagement scores were higher. I think what was even more telling was the qualitative evaluation of their engagement. And here we just asked participants at the end of the session to write down their reaction to the overall experience. And the qualitative evaluation was significantly better between the we group and the standard focus group. What's interesting is that the responses from the standard focus group were quite logical and also quite curt, which was kind of what you would expect from a group with implementers and problem solvers. However, look at the feeling and look at the depth of the feedback on just evaluating the process that we got from the we participants. Experience was better. I had a chance to get to know each other better and the topics that were going to be discussed. Open dialogue, more feelings were shared. Helps lower the wall. It was easier to connect. And so that was exactly what we were hoping to enable. And both the quantitative and qualitative evaluations of the experience seemed to suggest that the we methodology was performing as we had hoped. Well, how did we do on the results? So if you remember, the primary objective was to uncover emotional responses, and we actually provided all of the materials from both sessions to an MBA graduate student at Georgia State University. And we asked the analysts to go through and record the number of emotional responses. That's where it was very clear that the consumer was expressing a feeling of joy, sadness, fear, hate, love, and just count the number of unique instances where that was very evident in the materials. Also important to know that this analyst was not aware of the differences in the methodology. The only differences that the analyst noticed, of course, was that the type of content that was generated from the we group and the standard focus group was quite different, where they had transcripts versus videos, the video selfies, and group activities and photographs. All of that was provided to the analyst, and we were very encouraged to see that 1.6x the number of emotional responses were generated in the we group compared to the standard focus group. And we also asked the analysts through Georgia State University to also evaluate what she observed qualitatively. And this was the quote from that analyst, but they too noticed the difference in the quality of the feedback between the we group and the standard focus group. They said it was very evident that the participants in the we group were more passionate overall. Their stories were more detailed. They were more self-aware and informed of what was happening around them. And they provided very good recommendations on what they thought to be changed. And again, the level of insights overall, at least from the objective analysis of the Georgia State analysts, also indicated that there was a fairly significant difference between the we group and the standard focus group. So we are indeed encouraged by these results. Again, the premise is to build trust, and in building trust between study participants and the conversation leader, is going to break down barriers People are going to be much more apt to share with you the needs, emotions, beliefs, and pain points. I often joke that a standard focus group, right? It's strangers showing up to talk to other strangers. And then there's potentially more strangers behind the glass. And that's exactly what we're trying not to do. And it's critically important in the front end of innovation during that consult phase where you need to go out and you need to have a firm handle on consumer behavior, those emotions, those beliefs, those motivations that are driving consumers to behave and act in a certain manner. Very, very important fuel for your innovation efforts. I'd love to discuss this with you more. Feel free to reach out to me by phone or email. Thank you again for your attention, and hopefully we can engage with you at some point in the future.